What if your work ethic is actually a survival mechanism that's breaking your body? And surface level self care just won't fix this. In today's episode, we're diving into why unresolved perfectionism creates this silent physiological shutdown and how the only way to truly recover is to release this psychological grip of being flawless and perfect. Stay tuned, we're going to dig in. To the Secret Formula of Femininity for women who want to live a more feminine, fun, and fabulous life. I'm Dr. Nicole Monteiro, your host on this weekly journey to unlocking your inner radiance, nurturing fulfilling relationships, and becoming the best version of yourself. Welcome back to the Secret Formula of Femininity. I am your host and guide on this journey to tapping into your feminine essence, Dr. Nicole. I want to ask you something. Have you ever had one of those days where you felt like you just never stopped moving? You answered the emails, the phone calls, you fixed the kids' plates, you showed up for everyone. Maybe you even told yourself, today was so productive. But then you sit down and your body just feels heavy. Not just tired, but heavy, heavy. Even though you're exhausted, you can't get to sleep. And it feels like no amount of sleep, no catch up sleep on the weekends, no longer nights really helps you to feel rested. And your mind, let's not even talk about that. It's still going, it's replaying, planning, adjusting. And in that moment, a thought slips through. Why am I this tired when I'm doing everything right? That is the moment that we're talking about today and looking at the connection between perfectionism and that extreme tiredness that just won't go away. I need you to know you're not just tired, you're depleted from trying to be perfect. Today, we're going deeper than burnout, and you know burnout is one of my favorite topics. We're talking about the connection between unresolved perfectionism and chronic physical fatigue. Because for many women, perfectionism is not only a mindset, it's a nervous system pattern that they can't get out of. Let's start with something that so many women live with, but they haven't really named or don't really know how to name it. And that's that feeling of being tired, bone tired, but unable to relax. So feeling amped up while at the same time feeling completely depleted, unable to relax. You lie down, but your mind is still scanning, like I said before, planning, adjusting, reviewing. You take a break, but you don't feel restored inside. It's as if you didn't stop at all. You try to rest, but something in your body won't fully let go. You can't name it, but you feel it. And this is what's called being tired but wired. It's like you're on two opposite ends of the spectrum and you're fighting between them. And what it actually feels like is not necessarily collapse at first because you're hyped up, but it feels like double checking things just in case, mentally rehearsing conversations, which ironically, this is one of the signs of being completely exhausted and burnt out. You're constantly replaying things or feeling like you're not able to relax unless everything is done. Not one little thing can be out of place because you won't really relax. It feels like being slightly on edge, even in the quiet moments when you're supposed to be laying back, reading, watching a show, or just doing something relaxing. You're still like you're on the edge of your seat. Your body is still, but your system is not. Rest doesn't work in these situations because when your body doesn't feel like it's safe to rest, it won't rest. So let's talk a little bit about why that is. There's been so much research about the impact of prolonged stress. So, for example, the systems that are in place within our body and our mind to be able to deal with a crisis are not meant to be in permanent overdrive. So, that cortisol that helps when you need it in the moment is not something that you want to be chronically elevated. But when we're under prolonged stress, cortisol, that's exactly what happens. It remains elevated and the nervous system remains activated. And in that state, recovery doesn't have a place to fit in. It's impaired. And over time, this creates a level of fatigue that normal sleep just can't fix. And in fact, our bodies don't calm down enough for us to really experience the full repair of a healthy sleep cycle. Think about it. You're waking up at 3 a.m., your mind is racing. You have to go to the bathroom. That's a sign of elevated insulin resistance. There are all these signs that your body is confused. During the daytime, when you need the energy, you're exhausted, you're depleted. At night, when you're supposed to be calming down and resting and relaxing, your body is scanning for what it needs to do. These are signs of chronic stress and overwhelm. And stress is not just physical. Most of the time, especially for high achieving women, it's psychological and it's mental. And at the end of the day, you can't outrest a system that doesn't feel safe. And what many of us don't understand is that there's a psychological component to our system and our body feeling safe. So I want us to think about something deeper. It's something called the competence trap. Yes, bear with me, right? Because we think of being competent as a major goal that we want to get to as an achievement if we're already there. And this is essentially when your ability to function at a high level becomes your identity. It's not just something that's a tool for you to get the things done that you need to get or reach your goals. It becomes the entire way within which you see yourself. And one thing about identity is that it needs to be full and rich and not just a one track way of seeing yourself. But sometimes high achieving women, that competence, and we're going to get into it from what it felt like for us as a little girl to feel like we had to be competent. But sometimes that competence becomes our whole way of being and seeing ourselves. And so in that case, you're the one who gets things done, right? Sound familiar? You're the one who anticipates others' needs. I hear, especially from the elder girl children, that they anticipated everyone's needs. You're the one who is there to figure things out no matter what it is, whether it's the family reunion, the extended family vacation, what to do when someone passes away, financial advice, rescuing people in financial straits, giving health advice. You are the one who figures it out. You hold everything together because you are competent and responsible. And at first, this looks like strength. Everyone's like, oh, we can depend on her. She's so strong. She's so together. She's so smart. It looks like capability. You feel good about the fact that you are capable and others can depend on you. It looks like success. And in some ways, it is part of what has gotten you to the level that you are now, or you feel like it's the pathway to where you want to get to. But over time, what happens is it stops just being a skill and something you're good at, and it becomes not only an identity, but a survival strategy, one that's been carried over from childhood. And what many women have to understand is that what made you successful could also be the very thing that's exhausting you. And this was a moment of realization that I had to come to. And I talk a lot about my burnout story. I have always been super responsible. I was like that child who was very intellectually gifted, very emotionally intelligent and gifted. So being able to kind of tap into and perceive what was going on with others, having a level of empathy that made me want to take care of others, being very responsible, very capable, and these are skills that can get you to a certain point. But then it's almost like a U. They can turn around and get you right back to where you started, or even worse. There were times where I could go through an entire day being productive, but not once feel relaxed in my body. And it wasn't because something was wrong. I was physically healthy, but it was because I had trained myself or had gotten used to always being on. I've also worked with so many women who experience the same thing. In my coaching community, the Boundaries to Bliss Society, there's all kinds of women from different walks of life, yet they can relate to this competence trap. One of the women in the Boundaries to Bliss Society said something that stayed with me for so long. She said, I'm not overworking, I'm just doing what needs to be done. That told me everything I needed to know. So, anytime I talk to women about slowing down and resting, I first need to understand their mindset because for them, this is just the norm. They're just doing what has to be done. But when we talked more in the Boundaries to Bliss Society, we realized something so powerful. There was not a single moment in her day where she felt allowed to not be responsible. Every moment had a tone of being ready, being aware, anticipating needs. Even in her sleep, her body could feel when a need wasn't being met, and she woke up with that on her mind. She wasn't overworking, she was over functioning. And when we do that in our mind, there's a huge cost to the body. So I want us to bring this back to the body. It's not just a way of thinking, it becomes a way that your body responds. And with perfectionism, your brain is always scanning. Perfectionism trains your brain to look for mistakes, right? To anticipate problems, to stay alert in case something is about to happen. And this creates a chronic cortisol loop. Remember, cortisol is meant to help us rally our resources in a crisis, in an emergency. It's not meant to be constantly elevated. And in some extreme cases with chronic stress, cortisol goes so off the charts that the whole system gets dysregulated. And in a person's cortisol drops, it's almost undetectable. And then it's almost like an alarm that doesn't have any batteries. So at first, it used to be overly sensitive, overly heightened, and now it doesn't even perceive when there's a threat. The other thing is with perfectionism, the body never gets the signal to power down your parasympathetic nervous system. So when we think about the nervous system, there's a part of the nervous system, there's the central nervous system, and then there's the autonomic nervous system. And within that, there's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. So autonomic means it's involuntary. It reacts to the need that is in our environment. So, with the sympathetic nervous system, that's the fight or flight response. That's the body saying, okay, let's gather these resources because there is a potential threat or danger. The parasympathetic nervous system is that balancing part of that balancing act where it starts to calm the body down. So, if you look at animals in the wild, after predator and prey are out in the wild, after the prey gets away, it is able to shake it off, and that's when the parasympathetic nervous system comes in and balances out and helps to calm down. Well, when we're in that chronic cortisol loop, our nervous system, we're off balance. So the parasympathetic nervous system doesn't get a chance to come in and say, all right, we're safe now. Let's calm down. Let's slow our breathing. Heart rate steadies. Cortisol gets to dissipate. The system is out of whack and it doesn't power down. And what happens is our natural parasympathetic nervous system response gets suppressed, and we're all in that heightened sympathetic nervous system. And this happens because your body never feels like it's done. There's always the next thing to do or to watch out for or to correct. So there's never a time where the body says, okay, I'm safe now. There's no more threat. So essentially, perfectionism creates a sense of constantly being under threat. And then what happens? Energy depletion becomes chronic over time, meaning you're constantly in a state where you're not able to replenish and you're feeling depleted. Your energy just isn't there. Your body becomes fatigued, your system becomes completely wiped out, and that becomes your norm, your normal operating state. The perfectionism doesn't just live in your thoughts, it lives in your body and in your physiology. Now, let's go a little bit deeper. You see, this isn't only about behavior, it's about identity. That's what I alluded to earlier, how you see yourselves. And usually, that ultra competent, responsible woman, her whole identity is shaped around being just that competent and responsible. Many women learned early that I get attention when I do things well, I get that validation, that pat on the back. I'm easier to love when I don't make mistakes or I don't cause a dust up or people to get upset. I am safe when I perform. It has to be one of the more dangerous aspects of that identity because it says you're not safe if you're not productive or performing. And then at the end of the day, it's like, well, when do I just get to be? So, what I'm saying is, perfectionism has become a form of protection. And what do we do with protection? We want to keep it on. If it's a coat and we feel like it's protecting us because underneath we're naked, even in 100 degrees weather, we're going to keep that heavy coat on because it feels like the only thing we have covering up our nakedness. So, when you have that perfectionism as your sense of protection, even when it's not quite working, you're going to choose that over no protection at all. Now, there's a part of this that has to do with that inner child within us. There's often a younger part of you, that inner child that's wounded, that still believes if I get this right, if I get this one thing right, I'll be okay. I'll be protected. I'll be safe. But I need you to know that perfectionism is often a child strategy that has been carried into adult life. There's part of that development from the wounded child to the more healed adult that got disrupted, and it becomes your only form of protection. And in addition to the inner child, there's also grief there. There's grief for never feeling at ease, never having had that opportunity, for always feeling on, for never feeling like you could and never feeling now like you can just be. Your exhaustion isn't just physical, it's the weight of always trying to be enough. So if you think about it, those adults who as kids never got to be bored or never got to have fun or never got to feel like they got to screw up and have a second chance, they always felt like they were on and had to be perfect, and they carry that into their adult womanhood life. Now, I want us to talk about the shift. The shift is so important because we can diagnose the problem, but I'm also about like, how do we make the changes? How do we impact ourselves so we can be a healthier, happier, whole version of ourselves? You need to know that healing is not just from pushing harder, trying more, doing more. It comes from learning to create safety for yourself because perfectionism in your mind, without even knowing it, has been the only way to be safe. Step number one is you have to go from performance to safety. And when I teach my bliss formula inside my coaching programs where I help women to obtain balance, the first step is building an inner sanctuary, a place that you go to for safety. It's a place where you feel grounded, where you feel at ease, and where you feel safe, and where you don't have to perform. You have to teach your body that I am safe even when I'm not productive, even when I'm not performing, even when I'm not perfect. There's also somatic awareness. That's where you start noticing, not trying to change, simply noticing. Because part of being a perfectionist is you don't have time to sit and notice what's going on with you because you're all about noticing what's happening outside of you. Somatic awareness is, can I sit without fixing something? Can I pause without filling the space? Can I rest even if it feels like I haven't earned it? I have found that for so many women, the hardest part of healing is not the rest. It's actually learning to tolerate the stillness, the being, the quiet. The next thing that is really important is boundaries. Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. You will hear me say it over and over in many different variations. But the key is you need to not just protect your time, but your energy. And that's what boundaries are ultimately for. You have to ask yourself, what drains me? And on the other hand, what actually restores me? So, guess what? You want to be doing more of what restores you and less of what's draining you. You want to get to a place where there's more yeses left for you and more nos reserved for others. That's what we call energetic boundaries. The next part of making this shift, this identity shift, is redefining success. In fact, I was just a part of a book anthology that was called Redefining Success Beyond the Grind, because there's this way that high achieving women, ambitious women, feel like the only way to be is in that hustle and that grind mode. So you have to first start with being willing to redefine success. You have to understand that success is not constant pressure or rigid perfection or endless output and productivity. Real success is sustainability. It's learning to be in flow, getting in that zone where you're really present and you're really in the moment. It's having emotional resilience, and it's learning to connect with what's in alignment with you, not just doing things just to do them, but choosing, having the boundaries, choosing to do what is in alignment for you. So, the big reframe or the big shift in how you see yourself is to understand that you don't need perfection to be excellent. You need regulation, internal regulation of yourself. All right. So I want to get to some questions. I love when you guys send questions, and I've gone through my DMs, and these are some of the questions that really relate to this topic today. So the first one is, why am I tired even when I rest? Yes, that is an experience that so many of us have. And it's because your nervous system is still activated. Even at 3 in the morning, even at 12 at night, even early morning, your nervous system is activated. So even when you rest, you are still tired. So the second question is, can I still have high standards? Yes, absolutely. There's this idea that the only way to be excellent and to have high standards is to be perfect. What we're saying is we want you to have the high standards, but without the self punishment. So many of the people that I've worked with over the years equate self criticism, self punishment, self sabotage as the only things that can motivate them to be ambitious and to have high standards. But what I have found is those are the wounded parts of ourselves. The healthy parts of ourselves are motivated without self punishment. They remain able to have high standards even when they rest, even when they're and flow, even when they have downtime or time for play or connection. It should never be all work, 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 self criticism, self punishment. So, absolutely, you can still have high standards without being perfect. The third question is, how do I stop overthinking? Yes, overthinking is another feedback loop. And I need you to know that learning to break that loop starts in your body, not just with your thoughts. A lot of times we try to control our thoughts. So we're sitting in a chair overthinking and we think we can just battle in our minds with ourselves. You have to start with the body. Breath work, learning to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, learning to really have somatic awareness and create routines that you actually stick with and practice micro practices that help you to regulate your body. Excellent, excellent questions. Thank you so much for sending them. Now, I want us to pause for a minute and I want you to, if you need to, just close your eyes and I want you to use the power of imagination here. Imagine a version of you who can still show up, who still cares, who still has empathy, who still does meaningful work and meaningful actions. But her body isn't tight while she does these things. She's not bracing. She's not scanning for the next thing that needs to be fixed. She's not trying to get it perfect. She's not exhausted at the end of the day because she's no longer using pressure to power her life. Instead, she's using being regulated, her sense of being grounded, her connection to her healed self as the fuel for what she's trying to achieve. Now, if you're ready to move out of perfectionism, burnout, and constant pressure, this is exactly the work that we do inside the Boundaries to Bliss Society. This is my inner circle community where we help you to regulate your nervous system, reconnect with that core healthy part of yourself, and to build a life that feels as good as it looks on the outside. Ladies, I need you to understand you're not tired because you're doing too much. You're tired because your body has never been allowed to feel done. And in this moment, I'm giving you permission to say, you know what? I'm done. It's time to rest. It's time to regulate. And it's time to get back to myself. Thank you so much for joining me. Don't forget to share this episode with a woman that you know needs to hear it. Make sure you subscribe, give us a like, and leave a comment. Tell me, What was the sign that you were not just burnt out, but caught up in the loop of trying to be perfect? I want to hear from you. Again, thank you so much for joining. And until next time, I want you to practice being okay, not being perfect, staying soft, and staying feminine. I'll see you next time. I'm Dr. Nicole.